and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine. It is the first week of September 2024, and we have so many legal topics. And this is where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. It's been hard to choose. But what we're going to choose for this week is the terrible Georgia shooting, the high school shooting. We have another school shooting that has happened this week, 2 days after Labor Day on Wednesday, September 4th. We are going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about it just in terms of news, right? And the impact. We're going to talk about the legal aftermath. What is happening? What charges are being brought? Why they're being brought, and how they now relate to the recent case in Michigan where a school shooter's parents were convicted in April of this year, 2024, in regard to that school shooting. And now another parent has been charged in relation to the Georgia school shooting. So we're going to address that. We are going to address Hunter Biden's pleas of guilty to tax fraud and evasion. That happened this week. They were going to be seating the jury. It was supposed to be a jury trial. And all of a sudden, we have guilty pleas. We have full guilty pleas without, from what we can tell, any actual plea agreement, and with what's called an Alfred plea. So we're going to talk about what in the world does that mean? Does it have any impact? And what impact might it have on the other case he's also been found guilty of for gun charges? So we're going to tie all that together. Then we're going to do an update. We're going to do a Trump case update. And I wish it were a one case update, but it's going to be case updates because there are multiple ones. So we're going to go through quickly. We've had a lot of moving parts this last week in what's happening with multiples of his cases, including the hush money case, the Florida cases on appeal. We've got the DC case where there's been a lot of action going on with possible implications before and after the November election. So we've got a lot going on. E.G. and Carol's come back into the picture. We're going to do some case updates. And we also are going to talk about the Russian media interference case. There's been a federal indictment, 32-page indictment against two Russian media executives who have been working allegedly coming into propaganda, funneling money through a Tennessee-based company to pay influencers, conservative influencers, for propaganda pieces, video pieces that will go viral that are more pro-Russia. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the legal issues going on with the indictments, what the implications are, who's been found, who hasn't, and go from there. So we've got a lot to talk about in a short amount of time. I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which is the company that hosts the Legal Weekly Wine and the podcast, The Law Unscripted, as well as thelawanscripted.com, where law students, we provide supplemental bar and law school course reviews. So the 8 core subjects, including constitutional law, criminal law, right? Don't you need that right now? Honestly, anybody does. Evidence, 8 core subjects where you can learn with us through these programs. We also offer some fun merchandise. We've got some shirts, some fun sayings out there, some coffee tumblers. Check that out and check out my co-hosts. I've got our partner in The Law Unscripted and our law office, Tarani Law LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. Chelsea Rogers is with me. Welcome, Attorney Chelsea.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Please excuse my voice this week. I have a little bit of a cold, so sound a little bit different, but I am happy to be here to discuss everything that's happened this week.
I'm glad you were able to make it. I know you're feeling sick, so props to you for being here today, especially because you are a Georgia peach. You are our Georgia hometown person, and this happened very close to where you live.
About 2 hours away. It's not far from where I'm at right now at all, and it's horrifying, obviously.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you were able to attend today so that we can get some of your opinion too as someone on the ground and in a legal capacity. So
Absolutely.
we're going to talk with you especially about that case. And, you and I focused a lot on the prior Crumbley case, so I'm glad to have your thoughts. And our third co-host, we've got Dr. John Weil, the Dean of the Honors College at Middle Tennessee State University. He is our resident political science expert who also specializes in the Constitution, constitutional law, and the amending process. And for a political scientist, this year is quite the year. Between the law and political science, we've got a great combo here, especially for keeping your interest alive. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
All right, so let's get it started. I'm afraid I am talking a lot. I do want to give a fair warning. This sounds a little silly, but I've got my in-law's dog with us. He's a little fuzzy thing in the background on the couch. If you're looking
Your dog-in-law.
on YouTube, oh my gosh, I love that. My dog-in-law, that's so sweet. He is the cutest little thing. He's 14, he's old, and he's almost deaf. And I say that because he gets surprised very easily. And he barks very quickly and very loudly when he gets surprised. So just wanted to give that warning in case you hear the little fur ball barking, that's what's happening in the background. We love dogs here, but Buddy, he's in the background there. He's kind of our fourth co-host today. And let's get the wine going because I need some wine today. I'm not going to drink a lot. I'm going to drink a glass. It's funny. My mom keeps saying, she's like, oh my gosh, are you promoting alcoholism? No, we are not promoting alcoholism. We are promoting a drink, right? A drink for happy hour. I don't promote more than that. I promote healthy, conservative drinking with non-alcoholism. I don't know how else to say that, but please be wise with how you're drinking. I don't drive anywhere afterwards. I'm in my YouTube studio at home. Chelsea's at home when she's taping. Dr. Vile's only drinking water or some kind of Coke or Pepsi.
Only.
Oh, what are you drinking
think wine
today?
is made of? Where do you think it comes from?
Our wonderful water base. We added grapes to our water, but it is good to have that. And yes, at some point, maybe I wish we had Jesus to turn some water into wine. But I love that story in the Bible. I think it's a lot of fun. But there is also the main focus is the start of Jesus's mission into Christianity. Anyway, long story, and I'm rambling. I have some wine today, but I want to see, Dr. Vile, you were holding up some water.
Yeah, I think it's just generic. I learned something about grapes recently.
Okay.
So what happens when grapevines are subject to drought?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
They essentially drink the water from the grapes and all the grapes shrivel up, but that's their way of preserving the vine.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It is.
Okay, good to have that extra info from our Legal Weekly wine. I love this. Okay, so good. Chelsea, I know you're sick. Are you drinking?
I did. I got a small little glass, just a Moscato today, very basic. But I don't know if that was a small glass. It looked really big. I'm like,
it did look big
it's really
from
not.
here.
I just held it up and I was like, whoa.
I was wondering if you were going to do the alcohol-based cough syrup, if that was what you were going to be bringing.
I thought about it.
Well, I have got some wine, and I love this one. We went recently, we live in Maryland, and we went to a local winery recently. Let me make sure I've got it. Rockland's Farm Winery. And it was so pleasant. We brought some friends. We went in, we sat, we had a wine tasting, talked with some of the management there, and they were so lovely about this wine. I am doing a Montevideo. I'm trying to pronounce it correctly. But the label has a picture of the bridge that is there that you have to cross over in order to get to the winery. And there's so much fun backstory. This Montevideo is part Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. And it's 2021 Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where we are. So I have loved this one. This was one that I chose to bring home. Want to do a shout out to them and all of their wonderful company and excitement surrounding this wine. It's absolutely lovely blend. So cheers, everybody. And we'll put this down in the comments description section and give us a suggestion for one of our next wines. I've got at least another one from Rockland's Farm that we're going to do. But cheers, everyone. And let's get into our legal part of the weekly wine. All right, Chelsea, I'm going to come to you. We have had, as we stated at the beginning, another mass high school shooting. I'm going to give a quick background. It's a 14-year-old, a freshman in high school. This is, I mean, how many weeks have we even been in school this year? For this season, it's I believe four people who have died, 2 students and 2 teachers, and at least 9 who have also been injured. Talk to us about what's happening on the Georgia front, since that's where you are right now, and lead us into the legal section. But I want our Georgia Peach to address what's happening in your state.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, when we've talked about other shootings on here, I think it's so hard to say. You say the same thing. I feel like I say the same things every time, that it's heartbreaking. Like I have personally seen videos and pictures that have been shared by kids who are in the school as it's happening. You know, there's the heartbreaking screenshots of the texts that were being sent to parents. Makes me a little emotional. Like I said, we've talked about these other mass incidents here before. It's just so upsetting that this continues to be an issue in our country and in my state in particular. But legally, because if I stay on that too long, I might actually cry. So I'm going to switch gears a second. Legally, we have something really interesting going. So after the arrest was made of the 14-year-old boy, they immediately said that he was going to be handled as an adult. I believe it was the investigator or police sergeant who made that comment. I assume that meant he was going to be prosecuted as an adult. That's what's going to happen. In Georgia, there's a law. It's anyone between the ages of 13 and 17, and it's worded very strangely, who commits it's like a major crime, I think is how it's worded in the statute, is able to be tried as an adult.
I mean, homicide clearly fits.
You would think. More interesting, this morning that they have arrested and arraigned his father. And so, as you mentioned sort of at the top of the episode, we saw this with the Crumbley parents. He is being charged with some interesting charges. I don't know if you've seen how it's all laid out. So it's 2 counts of manslaughter, 2 counts of second degree, and 8 counts of cruelty to children.
How is this possible? Walk us through. I've seen that too. I've seen the involuntary manslaughter charges against the father, who's approximately 54 years old, I think. And then how is it that plus the second degree murder? You can't have more, can you?
Well, it's our favorite thing. It's lesser included. And I actually was wondering if they are doing this because the 4 deaths, they split it up somehow. I'm not sure, but I'm assuming it's just, going to be lesser included, and I assume he's going to plea out. But this is only the second time ever. So the Crumbleys were the first parents in Michigan that had been charged and now convicted after their son took a gun that they had provided to him into a school and started firing. This seems, from what we know so far, seems to be very factually similar. He bought this gun for this child as a Christmas present. I mean, it's August, 8 months ago? 9 months? Oh, it's September, JK, 9 months ago.
Right. Very recently.
Yeah.
And if I may add, the apparent culpability is that police had approached when his son was 13 years old. Apparently, it's believed that the son had posted something about a school shooting.
Yes.
They come to the house. The student says, it may have my name on it, but I didn't do it. Yep. The father says, yes, we have guns here, but they don't have ammunition in them. They're not accessible to my son. And you would think, this is something, frankly, it could potentially happen to almost any parent.
Terrifying.
With the way gun laws are, it's not that difficult to go out and, for a kid to find a gun if they know the right people or whatever.
In Georgia specifically, it's real easy.
To have parents on notice that there's concern about their son, and then to buy him a gun for Christmas of all things.
Take away the guns you have, hide the guns that you have. Don't buy another.
And I think I'm right on this, and Tennessee isn't far behind, but I believe that Georgia is one of those states where I don't think there may not even be restrictions on young people buying guns. I'm not positive about that, but they're fairly loose. Is that right?
There's no age to buy a rifle.
Right.
There's no minimum age to buy a rifle or to own a rifle. Handguns are a little bit different.
So you have to be 21 legally to consume alcohol.
Right.
You have to be
18
or 21 to buy cigarettes, right?
Yep. 21 now, I think.
You can't. But you have access to these weapons, and Chelsea, you said you're close. Everybody, I don't think there's a school that just in Nashville.
You had the shooting
children
last year
at the Covenant School thing.
Yeah.
And again, one person, I think she was a bit old, or I think it was a she.
I believe so.
In any event, she was a bit older, but the absolutists, we know almost every right in the Constitution. Free speech is about as absolute you can get, but you still have reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions.
Right.
Thank you.
The right against searches and seizures is almost absolute, except when it's not, except in exigent circumstances and, weapons lying around. But somehow we still have in our mind that whatever rule we put on guns is somehow going to be the banana peel that, leads us into Chinese totalitarianism or whatever. And it's
exactly. And it has been, as I'm a stepmother to a 16-year-old son who's in high school. He's a junior in high school. So this is hard for us to watch this, to even fear that it's going to happen to our son in his high school is a genuine fear, as for others. But legally as parents, it's terrifying of what if our son gets access? What if, I don't believe he would. I believe he's a wonderful boy who isn't considering this at all. We've had no indication. But as a parent, to be looking at that going, wow, you can be held responsible. Let's look at Newport News. Right? This last year, we had the 6-year-old shooting his teacher in a classroom, and the mother has been charged and convicted in federal court and state court for child endangerment, for child neglect, for violations of gun laws there. I don't believe there's any violations of gun laws in Georgia. They are much more relaxed in Georgia. But we're finally, I think, in a good way. Not every parent is being charged, but in a good way, we're holding parents accountable of if your child has been, it hasn't been proven, but if there's indications, solid indications that your child has made threats of a mass shooting.
I'm sorry, if the FBI shows up at your house, take the guns out of the house. I don't think that's an unreasonable, this makes me so mad.
Well, they can't, though, under Georgia law.
Well, no, I'm saying the parent should. So sorry, that the parent should. If the FBI comes knocking at your door, the parent needs to take it upon themselves to remove the guns from the home. I don't think that's a crazy expectation to have of people. That's
I
wild.
agree. Is, if the FBI shows up, there's at least credible information, right?
Yeah, he was posting on Discord that he was going to do this last year.
Right. Now, there was no proof that it was actually him. He claimed it wasn't him who did, but they shut down the Discord account. But with this even being an indication, it's like an alarm bell of parents pay a little more attention. If this is happening, if these claims are made, make sure you're paying attention to what's happening with your children. Watch them, listen to them, figure out what's going on in their lives. Don't give them a gun, and especially a rifle. We're going to give them an AR. And the poor father, he was crying and rocking back and forth in court when he appeared. And I can't blame him. But I would like to think that, if that happened to us or to any other parent, that we'd be like, okay, let's take it upon ourselves to completely restrict access, get rid of our guns, make them more secure, whatever it takes to have us prevent it and to try to prevent it. Get them in counseling, get them in a
Absolutely.
program, pay attention. And I think that's what we need to do as parents and as anyone who is involved with children, of pay attention. Now, there is lack of response. I will tell you, in my own life, we've got some issues with this type of thing, not with my son, not with my stepson, but in other areas. And it is hard for what is the reaction. And a lot of people are blaming the FBI and the police, but if there's no evidence, right? This isn't the Minority Report. We can't convict people or lock people up before something happens. Unfortunately, we're kind of wait and see what happens and then respond. But that's also to protect people's rights, right? To make sure that we don't imprison them for intent, but we imprison them for intent and action. But there's that balance of how do we prevent it versus just waiting. And Dr. Vile, it looks like you've got something to add on
I got
this.
a question, but I also have a comment, so I want to get that in too. But the question is, could some of these parents also be subject to civil suits?
Yes.
In other words, if you lost a child and you believe it's a result of negligence of a parent, so that's something to watch.
Absolutely.
But the other thing, the one positive thing in the shooting was how quickly police responded.
Yes. Versus the
Particularly
one in
compared, say, to
Texas.
Uvalde.
Yes.
And
Yes.
apparently, there's some new system that the teachers had
The
an
badges.
ID that they can press 4 times and get the principal, and 8 times or whatever and get the police. And
Yeah.
apparently, particularly in states that are so insistent that we're not going to in any way infringe gun rights,
Right.
maybe there are some things we can do in terms of hardening targets.
Yeah.
And most schools now, they have access restrictions as to who can come into the school and that sort of thing.
Right.
Maybe schools will eventually have to go to metal detectors.
Well,
And
and
I
that
suppose
was
some of them probably have.
exactly, and that's what's happened in our county, in Montgomery County, Maryland. The response on the TV that night is our former chief of police has now moved into Montgomery County Public Schools for work with them. And he was on the news saying, okay, there's been a lot of demand immediately for metal detectors. How are we going to move hundreds of students into schools in the morning to get there at a specific time through metal detectors, and where are we going to get the money to put them in? This is a years-long project, but it's something people have to consider. I'm thrilled that the teachers had an ability to respond. Sadly, it was, it happened afterwards, but that's a much better response than Uvalde, which did include civil action. And that was against the police department. So in that way, as much as we say this is a litigious society, we shouldn't do as much, in some ways it's helping, right? To have sued the police department for their failures in responses, for their pitiful response, for people, the chief, to have been removed from that. I think at least different school systems are learning and responding to that. So we're saving more lives than we would have. So in this case, I would like to think and believe that multiple lives were saved because of the systems they had in place, the locking of the doors, the ID badges, and others. But it will be interesting to see what other facts come out. Chelsea, like you're saying, it's very similar facts of the Michigan shooter's parents had gave him a gun.
That's what I
After
think.
indications of mental issues, of mental depression and anxiety. And then what came out in the trial was that the mother had taken him shooting that weekend. And I don't disapprove of taking your children out shooting in a supervised manner. I would rather them know how to shoot than not know how to shoot. But there are still precautions that must be taken and made. We've got the 6-year-old shooter in Newport News where the gun's somehow unsecured in a closet.
Right.
So, as much as we want to protect and keep our gun rights in America, and as much as they have given, especially in the last few years with the Supreme Court, there are more responsibilities on individuals than there are now in the federal government. And Dr. Vile, I think you would agree with that, with what's happened in the Supreme Court recently.
Well, we talked earlier that there are 2 Supreme Court cases one, Roper versus Simmons in 2005, you cannot convict, you cannot sentence a juvenile to capital punishment. And there is some science behind this.
Right.
There is some science that shows that the parts of the brain that govern your ability to control your behavior are less developed at 14 than they would be at 24 or 21 or whatever the age is.
Right.
There's a subsequent decision, which I think is a little trickier, Miller versus Alabama 2012, that you also can't sentence them to life without parole. And I guess the thinking is, that makes sense maybe for a 60-year-old who engages in a mass shooting because maybe they only have 10, 20 years left. But, to tell somebody at 14 that they're going to be in jail for 60 or 70 years seems like a lot. On the other hand, there are parents who will never see their children again, and
Exactly.
husbands and wives of the teachers who will never see them again.
And what constitutional provision is being used for these cases?
Eighth Amendment, the cruel and unusual punishment. And there's another development in that area, and I wish I could remember. I'm trying to look here. I don't see the name of the case, but some years back there was a case in Louisiana that prohibited using the death penalty for forcible rape that did not result in death. And there have been at least 2 or 3 states now that have adopted laws to do just that, in the hopes that maybe a more conservative court will change its mind.
Yeah, and we have it is interesting because I go back and forth in it. I'm a former prosecutor. I did multiple homicide cases, prosecuted those, and prosecuted multiple rape cases. A lot of violent crimes is what I did. I did gang cases.
Wait, you didn't do a lot of violent crimes.
Correct.
Okay. You prosecuted.
That is
Let's make this clear.
true.
Okay?
Yes,
you might lose our audience here.
I prosecuted them, and I'll return. Some of you may remember this story, but for those who haven't heard it, it's prosecutor speak is very interesting. And the first couple of weeks I was a prosecutor, I called my mom and I called her up and I was like, "Mom, I'm doing great." And she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I was on the drugs, guns, and gangs team. And we went to court on Thursdays. That was our court days. So we had specific days of the week. We had a specific team member that went with us. And she's like, "Well, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Mom, I do drugs on Thursdays." And so it was you do what, honey? Oh. So yes, no, I do not do violent crimes, nor did I. It was prosecuting them. So I have a lot of very mixed emotions about this type because I'm very protective of victims. And their families and how hard this is and how much of an impact. But I do also understand the juvenile side of it. I ended up working on juvenile and domestic violence in Winchester, Virginia, as a prosecutor as well. And I remember going to a meeting, and we were specifically talking about younger boys at the time, and especially as a stepmother of boys, it was a horrifying conversation because it was a lot of counselors and social workers, and they were saying the science that you're talking about, Dr. Weil, and I'm not as familiar with it, but they were saying, oh, the science is that boys' brains especially do not develop as much until they're 25. And at the time, my boys were younger, and I squeaked out, involuntarily, I squeaked out, 25. And I went home and cried. But there is apparently some science on that. And a part of me is saying, if these younger boys are that much of a risk and a threat to people already, how much more as they grow up? But then there are others on the other side saying, it's going to get less as they grow up. I don't know the science. I'm glad I'm not the decision maker in this. Our prayers and thoughts with those who are dealing with this tragedy. And a call out to parents, please watch your children, check in with them, look at them, pay attention, protect them, and help protect other children who aren't your own. This isn't something that's normal. I mean, it's more commonplace now than it's ever been. It started in 1999. Very significantly remember the Columbine shooting. I was not there, but it was fairly close to where we were. And it was the start of this, and it's not going away. So we need to pay attention. So let's move from that into another firearms case. Let's talk about Hunter Biden. This is Joe Biden's son, President Joe Biden's son. Earlier this year, he was convicted of firearms charges of basically being, I can't remember the specific charges. Chelsea, help me out with this.
I was just trying to look and see if I could pull it up real quick. I think it was.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No.
go ahead.
If you know
I
what
think
they are.
it's that he went through a long period that he describes in his
Paperwork.
autobiography where he was on drugs, having sex with a lot of people. I mean, totally out of control, basically. And when he went to purchase the guns, he had to sign a statement saying that he was not addicted or, had not taken drugs within so long, and he lied about it. There may be more to it than that, but I think that was basically it.
Thank you.
To my knowledge, I don't think there's evidence that he actually abused gun rights in terms of shooting at somebody or threatening somebody with a gun.
That is correct.
But he lied on a form, and frankly, I mean, that's not something I encourage anybody to do, but I would think that most people would probably lie about such. I mean, that may be one of those laws that's not terribly maybe the question needed to be a little bit more precise. Have you been in a state mental institution, or have you been through drug rehabilitation or something like that? I'm not sure, but that I think is a basic.
You're calling that back to mind as we had a very specific conversation on this show about, no one would want to admit they're having, depression or anxiety or other mental health issues on a federal form. But it specifically is saying you can't buy a gun if you are in a mental health crisis or having mental health issues or using drugs. That was also an issue with the 6-year-old shooter's mother, of having purchased a gun while she was abusing marijuana. So that is a common issue that's happening federally, and they did prosecute and convict Hunter Biden of this. His sentencing has not yet occurred, but he is now a convicted felon. So we have a second set of charges that has come in. A jury trial was supposed to be sat and had this first week of September. And in a surprise, Hunter Biden pled guilty.
Right. Now, this is not gun charges.
Correct. No. This is the second set of charges.
Tax evasion.
Right? Tax evasion, which my understanding is he has actually paid the taxes back.
Correct.
He did it after being discovered. I mean, he didn't he wasn't goody two shoes or something that they discovered. And if I recall, and this is a really tricky case.
Yes.
Because I believe he thought he had a deal worked out where he's paid it back, he's admitted it, and the government said they weren't going to prosecute.
Right. Not that you should have.
Plea bargain, basically. And the judge basically squashed it and said, and perhaps out of suspicion or fear that it was being done for him because he was a public figure as opposed to others. I'm not sure what the judge's reasons were.
Yeah.
But, there's the surprise in this case is why didn't, they got up to the jury selection process before he decided to take a plea. And he first offered what's known as an alpha plea, which I'll let you describe. And then he just offered a plain plea. Apparently he signed a statement, and I don't know if you can trust what he signs based on the gun.
Right.
But he or the prosecutor, one or both, have signed a statement saying there's no quid pro quo here. I'm doing this voluntarily. But what I have read articles that say that people who force the state, fairly or not, you have a right to a jury trial.
Right.
But those who assert the right, if they're convicted, almost always end up with far stiffer sentences than if they
Yes.
hadn't put the government to the bother of it.
Correct.
And I think it's a combination of, I mean, now he's given a more altruistic reason,
For
which
his
is,
family.
he doesn't want his daughter to have to testify against him. He doesn't want to bring more shame on his family. And, he's basically done that. When he published his book, he basically told everything there was to tell.
Oh, it's so sad
But
with the sister-in-law and it's
Right,
just so
right.
pitiful.
Yeah.
But in any event, what you have here, you had sort of an unexpected plea. He probably hasn't been promised anything, but had he been convicted, he will almost surely have gotten a harsher sentence than if he hadn't taken the state through the expense of this. Now, the
Right.
big question is there a chance ever that Hunter Biden and Donald Trump will be in the same federal prison at the same time? Maybe they could share a cell.
Now, wouldn't that be the plot twist of all plot twists?
That would do it. Yes, I'm not anticipating that, by the way.
I'll put that on my bingo
But-
card, my 2025 bingo card. I think that's going to go on there.
I love it. And Chelsea, let's go to you, because you and I have had so many talks about sentencing guidelines and especially with federal sentencing guidelines. And there is a twist here. Dr. Viles mentioning, there's a harsher sentence if you go through the full trial and get convicted versus if you plead. Why is that? What's the piece of the guidelines that we're looking at in relation to this?
So I'm pretty sure this is all of the states. We looked at them. I just know the federal ones, that if you accept responsibility, you get it's a point essentially on how it works in the matrix of your sentencing, which is so funny to think that could impact what that guideline is. I also think it's interesting that this is a fun fact I know from law school. One thing I remembered, even after they got rid of mandatory sentences, basically everybody still gives what the guidelines are. Like, it is 0.001% of sentences are outside of what the guidelines are, which I think is interesting. I mean, if you're into that kind of stuff, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's literally a point system. So I've never
Yes.
done federal sentencing guidelines. I know of them. I know how they work. But I've done state prosecutions and state criminal defenses. And there's literally a little chart, a point system. You go through and you say, instead of true, false, it's, what's the actual charge, and you go through and there's literally a list of numbers and it has the charges and numbers, and you go through ... and you put the number in the little box.
And then you move up.
And then you go to the next one, and has the person been previously convicted? There's a point that goes with that. If yes, you go ... you put a number in, and you go down and you add up the numbers, and you go to a chart that has, put in the number for this charge of what you came up with your little graph. And then it says, with that number, here's the sentencing range that we suggest. And it's usually a sentencing commission within the federal system, within each state. There's the Virginia Sentencing Commission that comes up with these numbers and goes through a whole bunch of analysis and reasoning behind it and says, for this charge with this number, we suggest this guidelines. And you're right. It's usually... The good thing is the Supreme Court has said, based on our Constitution, based on our rules, you should not be required. They cannot be mandatory. They're great suggestions, and you can follow the suggestions, but they can't be mandatory. And there are very few cases in my time in prosecution and criminal defense, over 12 years, I focused on criminal law solely. In my practice, I've been practicing about 19 now. And for those 12 years, I can think of 3 cases.
Wow.
That I said, you know what, let's go outside of the guidelines. As a prosecutor, let's go above or below the guidelines, and here's why. As a criminal defense attorney, it was all the time. Let's go below the guidelines. Let's go below the guidelines or at the guidelines. Please don't go over the guidelines. But it is very rare.
So something Chelsea said, maybe it'll connect us back to the Alford plea.
Yes, good.
Because, you said one of the things that's considered is acceptance of responsibility, some show of remorse.
Yes.
And then this relate in part to what he originally came to court to do. The Alford plea basically says, as I understand it, I believe there's enough evidence here to convict me. I'm not necessarily owning up to it, but I acknowledge I'll probably be convicted, right?
That's exactly what it is. It's a plea.
It's the goofiest thing ever. And I think this was a fascination of mine for a very long time, and Virginia knows because she had to listen to me talk about it, because I don't understand the purpose of it, because it's essentially saying, it's like the OJ book, right? If I did it, this is like, you could convict me. It's sort of that thing. And it's the goofiest thing ever because it doesn't really impact anything except maybe your guidelines for sentencing.
That's exactly right. It's called the Alford plea. There are some states that have a different term for it just because they have a state case that confirms and goes along with the federal Alford plea, what's called the Alford plea. And it's a plea of no contest, nolo contendere, no contest that's exactly right, Dr. Vile. I'm not contesting this. I'm agreeing that you will have enough evidence, the state can produce enough evidence to convict me, which is beyond a reasonable doubt.
So it looks really bad for me.
It does. It looks horrible. I can't contest it. I can't present enough defense to overcome this evidence. I agree that I will be convicted. So I will not
admit to doing it.
But I'm not going to admit it. That's exactly what it is. And in this case, in Hunter Biden's case, the state has to usually approve. The prosecution has to agree that, okay, well, he can say whatever
usually
he wants.
Won't, right?
But federally, they usually won't. State, I can't remember I ever objected to it. As a state prosecutor, I was like, whatever, it's the same thing. Right. Yeah. It's still a conviction. There's still a convicted felon. They're still agreeing that there's a guilty plea. Ultimately, they're not saying they did it, but they can find in the system. It shows the same.
Yeah. It shows it's like their own personal weird thing. Like, it's so silly, kind of.
Right. So, I don't see much use for it. And honestly, I don't think it makes a difference. But federally, in some states, you do have to have consent of the prosecution to do it. And in this case, they didn't. And honestly, I think it's going to help Hunter Biden because he's pleading guilty straight up, is how we would say it. It's, the
no
kind
deal,
of loose
nothing.
Term. If you pled without a
deal,
caught
me.
You pled guilty, you didn't take the Alford plea, and we'll give you higher credit for it on these sentencing guidelines. And the defense can say it. They're going to take a few months to go over the guidelines to do an investigation. Just like with Trump, they're going to do an investigation into his background, come up with these guidelines. And Hunter Biden's attorney is going to get up and say, he pled guilty. He admitted it. He took responsibility. He did it for his family. He did it for whatever. He's trying to make his life better. He's trying to improve. He was convicted of this. He learned his lesson. There are all these things that go into it. But I think they actually did him a favor with regard to sentencing. But they can take into account his recent felony conviction, which will add points against him in sentencing for the tax evasion case.
And there's a constitutional issue here, which is president's pardon power.
Yes.
The president has the power to pardon any federal offense. Biden has said that he will not.
That's
and
what
I believe
he said.
that he won't.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that he won't. Yeah. And I would think that if Harris were elected, she would not either, because it would look first, it would emphasize the tie, between her and Biden, which is not necessarily help her, but they want to portray themselves, particularly if the Trump investigations continue, in opposition to, trying to be above the law. And so, I mean, in some ways, if it were a different situation, well, Bill Clinton pardoned his brother of drug offenses on one of the last days of his terms.
Right.
And I actually have written an article. One of my concerns, imagine that.
No, I didn't know any of this happened. I didn't know this happened.
Power is that a lot of these pardons are done by departing presidents after they've been defeated or have decided not to run for re-election, and they don't have the same accountability as if a president, as Gerald Ford did, and I
Right, of Nixon.
necessarily prove this, but early in his administration, he pardoned Richard Nixon. Ford had very little. In fact, I think he lost a lot by doing that. But at least, he was then accountable at an election.
Right.
Biden would not be, if he's not going to run again, not be so accountable. And I
but
have
his
concern.
legacy, I mean, he's
Right.
focused so much on the legacy he's leaving, especially
Well,
since he's not running
That's
again.
some accountability, but again, in Clinton's case, it didn't stop him from pardoning a brother. And in
there's
a lot
nothing
of
in the Constitution to prevent familial,
that's
pardons.
Right. And increasingly, pardons seem to be used to protect political friends. If you remember, D'Souza, I believe, the sort of propagandist, got pardoned by Donald Trump, and lo and behold, he's a major Trump supporter.
Right.
So there are some problems with that.
And Trump is promising to pardon anyone
January
who's
6th.
been convicted with January 6th offenses.
Well, I don't think he's been what he certainly expressed you're right. He certainly expressed a willingness to pardon many of them. I think he's backtracked a bit if they've attacked police officers, but yes, it's an ongoing issue in the Constitution.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a silly, goofy thing. I like that we do it. I'm sorry. This is like my least serious take. I think that being president sounds terrible, and they should get a little funsies. They should get a pardon their brother for a drug crime. Like I'm okay with that.
Okay, what have you done, Chelsea?
Nothing that I've been caught for, Dr. Vile.
Talk to her mother. We'll find out.
Okay.
It's a little fun. You can have a pardon as a treat. Just a little treat.
Well, but if you look historically, the pardon power actually had a very serious purpose.
Oh.
And particularly in cases of domestic rebellion.
Okay.
If you could offer a pardon to someone who otherwise was going to continue warring against the United States for and pardon power was useful at the end of the Civil War.
Sure.
And sort of reintegrating, some of the people who have been former Confederates back into the Union.
Grant versus Lee.
There are times where, and there are cases, frankly, where our legal system acts very slow. Am I right? True innocence in some cases is not in some states and in some cases is not a grounds for an appeal of a sentence. And so you have somebody, there's new DNA evidence, and the system won't work to do them. Well, that's when you need somebody to be able to step in and say, this is a clear injustice. This erodes respect for the judicial system. There's where pardon power really does come. It wasn't,
True.
I mean, I like your idea of, it's sort of nice to have a prerogative or two as president, but it wasn't made to make the president happy.
Right.
It was designed to protect the country against certain, against injustices and against potential rebellions.
Well, let me give a quick teaser, and then let's talk about the Russian media case. We have picked back up the Law Unscripted podcast. So we are the Law Unscripted company, but the podcast is resuming again, and Chelsea and I are doing that. And I'm going to give a teaser of some special defenses. We're going to be doing a series, and one of my favorite cases that we will be talking about is similar, where there's a claim of actual innocence, right? We've got the Innocence Project out there that I'm a fan of. Even as a former prosecutor, I'm also a former criminal defense attorney. I still take some criminal defense cases. And I do believe that there are innocent out there who have been wrongfully charged. And especially in the past, there's so many cases I get worked up about. But there was one in Virginia, that one of my professors wrote a book about. May God Have Mercy. Wonderful book, absolutely wonderful book. He wrote it while he was still alive. It was still a big debate and question while he was still alive. I had him sign my book. It was amazing. So we are going to tackle that case on the Law Unscripted coming up. So if you're interested in those types of things, we're also going to talk about the Lorena Bobbitt case, special defenses. And Chelsea, remind me the case. It's the sex trafficking defense, which is
in Wisconsin, Crystal Kaiser. This has been my obsession for years, and it finally came to a conclusion while we were on our work trip.
That's right. So we're going to take up the Crystal Kaiser case. So if you're looking at more of a deep dive for cases, and especially some more unique and interesting defenses and cases, we will be covering that on the Law Unscripted this fall of 2024. But for the Legal Weekly Wine, let's finish up with the Russian media case and a couple of quick Trump case updates. There is a recent indictment that has come out this week. I'm telling you, this week has been hottest legal topics. It's how many to count. But this one is particularly concerning to me. As a lawyer, as an American citizen, as whatever political party it is, I feel like this is concerning. The Justice Department has filed a 32-page indictment against two, I can't pronounce their names, I'm not going to even try, two Russian state news media employees who, I don't know, I haven't read the indictment itself. I don't know if they were in America or not. I know they have not been found and arrested here. I know there is a warrant for them based on this indictment, but they're accused of conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act and conspiring to do money in cases of money laundering. And the essence of this case is that they have paid a conservative media outlet based in Tennessee, where you are, Dr. File.
Not my fault.
No, it's definitely not your fault. To my knowledge, you have no connection at all with Tenet Media.
That's what he wants you to think.
But there's this allegation that Russian interference, not even, presidential election or candidates or campaigns are interfering, but that we've got Russian interference. And in this case, to have come up with a federal indictment, we're talking about the FBI. We talked about that with the Georgia shooter case. If they've got enough evidence for an indictment, there's fairly substantial evidence. Convictions, I don't know. I'm not saying. But there's at least substantial evidence to support an indictment certified by a grand jury that these two have conspired with this Tennessee company to pay millions of dollars to conservative YouTube and social media contributors who are, at $400,000 signing bonus, $100,000 per episode, 4 videos a week that will support but Russian ideas of what they want for America. So there's supposedly pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine propaganda coming out. There's supposedly a lot of fear-mongering regarding the border crisis or the alleged border crisis of trying to create a crisis that may or may not be present. So a lot of immigration influence, talk about immigration and the border. And this is concerning, especially because our campaign is focused, Harris, Trump, whichever campaign you're supporting, are focused on the border and immigration and how people who are coming in. And the question is, forget the campaigns. Are we really being influenced by foreign governments? And there was already a question in 2016. Dr. Weil, what do you know about the origins of the Russian allegations in 2016 and how they're different?
This isn't really, it's not unique to Russia. We do similar things in elections in other countries.
That we interfere.
Some of this is just traditional, we're going to try to weaken you every way you can. I don't know that they got money for it, but for many years, the American Communist Party was effectively a voice piece for whatever happened in Russia or the Soviet Union. And they lost a lot of credibility because of this, because they literally would turn on a dime as Russian policy turned on a dime. What we have now, I think, is a little bit more subtle. It's almost the dark side of Radio Free Europe. Radio Free Europe was designed to send information into totalitarian nations where only one viewpoint was being expressed and try to tell them, what was really going on. This is people using our open society, our First Amendment freedoms, basically to spread fear and get people riled up, civil rights, chauvinism, whatever. Think of whatever ugly things you can think of. If you see them on the media, and this is, I've given this lecture before, but you got the New York Times, you got the Wall Street Journal, you got Washington Post, you got Chicago Tribune. Some lean a little right, some lean a little left. You got the BBC. There are outlets out there that generally you can trust. And then you have the wild west of the internet, where any fool or any knave can basically post what they want without any consequences and without any checking. And the easiest things to start, frankly, are rumors.
Right.
To take an example, and some people won't like this one, but the whole birther controversy.
The which one?
There's the birther. There was Trump long before he ran for president was claiming that Barack Obama had not been born in the United States.
Yes, the birth certificate issue. Yeah,
and
ridiculous.
How many people believe that? I have heard similar, allegations about, sexual behavior or identity, often of prominent politicians. And people see something like this, and we, it's sort of bait, right? This is interesting. You get a little dopamine. Whoa, wouldn't this be fascinating? And before you know it, the snowball starts running down the hill, and it becomes a major factor. But yes, at least the last two campaigns, it appears as though foreign agents, not so much, I think, I think they have favored some candidates over others, but they don't particularly care who they favor so much as let's stir up let's use the race card.
They're sowing
let's
discord.
Use the immigration card. Let's use, if it had been a century ago, let's use the anti-Catholic card.
Right.
There are certain sort of buttons, if you push and the right people see them, they can have very dire consequences. And by the way, the same week that the government is bringing this, there's a major indictment against Linda son and her husband. She's an aide, a former aide to Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, which claims she was born in China. She's a naturalized citizen, but according to the claim, has accepted literally millions of dollars, catered meals, special gifts, simply for trying to keep Taiwan from agents from being able to talk to the governor and people from the People's Republic to be able to do so. So, and again, some of these are things that nations do knowing that they're lawless.
Right.
It's technically we have spies all over the world.
Of course.
And in some ways they do a good purpose. If we didn't have spies, we wouldn't know vital information sometimes. And maybe, it's not quite the need to spy on us because we're such an open society to begin with.
We tell everybody what we want, including on TikTok, which is
right.
why there's potential litigation.
But this is
scan my face, get my info.
This is how many people are unwitting agents of foreign governments and have no idea. If you told some of these people you're working for communists or you're working for Russians, no, not me.
Right.
But yes, wittingly or unwittingly.
Part of the scariest thing in these indictments is that some of these social media influencers really didn't know. They didn't know that Russian money was coming in to pay for them to support some of these ideas and views and to make these videos, which are getting millions of views.
Right.
And that's the scariest part, is what we don't know. Right. So just like with the Georgia cases, pay attention. think, look, ask questions. Don't take anything on face value. I'm an attorney. I'm married to a former police officer. I am so cynical. I hardly take anything at face value. My poor child, who comes home from school and gets the third degree from, both parents as an attorney and a police officer, he'd probably rather, is looking for any possibility for foster care. I'm sure he's taking applications. But ask questions, look, and especially if you're being paid money. And as social influencers, I mean, as much as it's frustrating to think, oh, TikTok's going to be shut down, this is our First Amendment freedoms, etc., there's reasons why it's being investigated. There's reasons why there are federal government employees who are being told you can't, use TikTok. There's possible Chinese government influences. Let's look at what we're doing in this election. I don't care who you're voting for. Ask questions. This is basic political science. And watch the debate. Yes,
Tuesday
we've got
night.
a debate coming up.
We've had a history every year every 4 years from 1976 forward. There's been at least one or more presidential debates. First televised debate was what year?
It was Kennedy, right?
Nixon and Kennedy.
1960s first. And the most famous presidential debates really weren't presidential debates. They were the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which were over the Senate and obviously later influenced the 1860 election.
Yeah, so we have that coming up the second week of September. We should be publishing this episode before those debates come out. Watch them.
And have we done the Trump business? I'm not sure.
That's where we're headed next. Okay. So we do need to do some Trump case updates because we have quite a few. Where are you headed, Dr. Vial?
Well, I mean, there's an appeal of the last case that E. Jean Carroll did, in which Trump's people are claiming that they should not have used the Hollywood access tapes as part of the evidence. And part of their response has been, well, Trump had an opportunity to testify and refused to do so. So that's one of them. The other case that I think in a sense is going to be far more consequential is this case about presidential immunity. To what degree does he have immunity, particularly on the election charges?
Right, in DC.
What is going to be the timing? Judge Chutkan, I believe it is.
Yes.
Apparently, Trump's attorneys got something of a rude awakening. They came to court thinking she was willing to delay, and she's suggesting that, no, we might go ahead and go forward with some of this evidence, even if it's during a presidential election. And frankly, I have mixed feelings about this.
Okay.
I mean, I think on the side, generally, I don't like attorney generals and prosecutors deciding presidential elections. On the other hand, if you have a case where someone has delayed, and then says, well, it's too late now because it's going to interfere with the election, maybe you should have thought of it, and I do think the American people should know specifically what the evidence is in regard to presidential election tampering.
Right. And what you're speaking of is there was the new indictment, the superseding indictment in the DC federal charges regarding election interference for Donald Trump. And we've got my dog-in-law who's barking now, but he's going to accent this piece. So we've got the superseding indictment that came down, so he's been rearraigned or waived the arraignment on it. But in normal cases, in any other case, there's a scheduling order. This is not new or specific to Trump. There's always a scheduling order that comes out by the judge that says, here's how we're doing this case. Here's the timeline of the case. Here's when this is due, this is due, this is due, and here's the trial. In this particular case, what you're speaking of, Dr. Vial, is that Judge Chutkan has said the prosecution has to turn over its evidence by, I believe it's a September date. I mean, it's very quick. And the question is, if they turn over all this evidence, how much is being made public?
Right.
And it's right before an election. So is this fair? Is this right? Is it a way of influencing the election? Is it a claim of bias on the judge, that the judge is improperly influencing an election, versus the question of, to what extent is she just issuing a normal scheduling order in a normal criminal case for one that's already been delayed and that was postponed by the Supreme Court decision and request of this presidential immunity, and now has been changed based on that case. And like you're saying, Dr. Vial, to what extent do we have the right to see it? I mean, how much came out about Hillary Clinton before the 2016 election with regard to her emails and the email server issue? Chelsea, I think you've got a fairly strong opinion on these.
Yeah. I do. I was going to, yes. Sorry.
Please.
I'm like collecting my thoughts. No, I do. I mean, I think that, in my opinion, we should have as much information as we can make public. I think that I want an informed population when they're making that choice. And I think about it like this. This is the funny part of it, is that, in evidence, we have evidentiary rules, right?
Yes.
And I used to have an he was a trial ad professor, but he would say this all the time, and it cracked me up, because the way the rules are written, it says improperly biased. This would be improperly biased. It's not that you don't want to bring in something to bias, but you don't want it to be improperly biasing. And so I think this may influence the election, sure, but is it improper for it to do so? I kind of think it's like that.
Right.
And of course, if Trump, if Trump is reelected, almost surely nothing will go forward for 4 years, at least not of a public nature.
Correct.
And so if we're going to ever, there's possibility we'd never find out about it if some of it doesn't come out before the election.
Right. And to me, it's hard because any of this information that may be coming out, not all of it, like you're saying, Chelsea, I think is very wise, is it's not necessarily admissible at trial. So all of us may be getting information that the jury can't receive based on specific evidentiary rules. But I will tell you, for the 2016 election, with regard to Hillary Clinton, that impacted me. It did. As a human being, as an American voter, that did impact me. And there was a reason Trump wanted it out, and there was a reason it came out. And in the same vein, it's coming out now against Trump. So it's, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. But I do question how much of it coming out publicly can we, or not we, but, how much can Trump's team prevent from coming out publicly beforehand, where they can say, look, this would prejudice a potential jury pool. We're going to get an unfair trial because not all of this evidence will actually be admissible at trial. That would be the tactic I would be using as Trump's legal team. Is, let's not focus on the voters. Let's focus on the potential jury. Who's going to see this information? How much of it would really come in? We haven't had an evidentiary question and hearing on this yet, and we don't want to taint a potential jury pool. So that's what I would be focusing on.
And his attorneys are focusing, as I understand it, they say under the Supreme Court, Trump versus U.S., he actually has immunity for this.
Correct.
And he should settle the immunity question before she settles the rest.
True. And everyone's admitted, including the judge, is, look, this is going up on appeal with regard to what actions are under presidential immunity versus what's not. We're all anticipating it. So, okay, so that's the update on the D.C. case. Now, Chelsea, you and I have done a lot with the New York hush money case, and Dr. Vial, I know you've been involved too. But
no,
Chelsea,
I haven't. I've never paid hush money. Never received hush money.
This is me. I've never committed a violent crime. You've never received hush money. You've never demanded hush money. Haven't had a need for hush money. Chelsea.
I don't know anything to hide.
So funny. Your wife will be so glad to know. Chelsea, what's happening with this?
My daughters, hopefully.
Yes, and as one of your daughters, I am very glad to hear that. That makes me very, very happy to know. So, Chelsea, we've had this hush money case. We've had a conviction of 34 indictments that were not pleas, but findings of guilt by the jury. Now what?
Well, we're pending, right? We're waiting for sentencing, and it looks like that's going to keep getting pushed back. I think originally it was supposed to be the very beginning of this month, September.
Correct.
And I don't even know if they've set a new date. I could be wrong about that.
I think it's
Have
November 29th. It's the very end of November, right around my birthday.
But after the election is the key point.
Exactly. It has been pushed. And the question we're all still waiting for is how much of it will be influenced, or will it be reopened based on the new Supreme Court ruling of Trump versus U.S. with the presidential immunity of, is hush money payment an unofficial act of a president? How much of it was...
I sort of hope so.
I hope so.
Is tampering with an election
hush money
an
is
official
act, other than maybe to foreign actors,
Right.
I mean, and the thing that makes it the felony, I think that this is the hard part too, is that it's an election crime, right?
Yes.
That's the felony that's included. And I think that is scary if we end up saying, well, a president has immunity from tampering with an election. That's a crazy thing for us to move into. And I really hope that's not what happens.
But even if it is, we can't use the official acts to prove it. And that, I think, is going to be the crux of this decision. I think that's going to be the thing that we struggle with.
Any of it.
Exactly.
It was a rotten decision. Let me just say it. Trump versus United States. It was so inferior to the two lower court decisions.
Yes.
The court decided far more than it needed to.
Agreed. And we had from that decision this one random concurring opinion by Justice Thomas. We now have influencing the Florida case.
Yeah,
which is the issue, the legitimacy of special counsel, and that has been raised again this week as well.
Mm-hmm. So the Florida case was dismissed by Judge Cannon. And that is on appeal. Special prosecutor Jack Smith has appealed that, saying it was improperly done. So I'm anticipating, as I believe both of you are, is that's going to get up to the Supreme Court too. And Justice Thomas has made it known.
I'm sorry, but Judge Chutkan deliberately distanced. She basically said, I don't think Cannon's decision is going to make it.
She said it this week.
Right. Mm-hmm. She cited a case out of the D.C. Circuit, which would be the one that would govern her, in which it upheld a similar special counsel provision.
Exactly.
And so, I think the weight of scholarly evidence, or the weight of scholarly opinion right now, is that Chutkan is probably right, that Cannon's decision seems to be an outlier. Now, we got a court that's been fairly willing to change precedent, so nothing is absolutely certain. But she is basing it basically on we've talked before, about ratio descendi, or descendendi, I guess it is, versus obiter dicta.
Remind us what those are, because it's certainly a foreign language, literally.
The obiter dicta, the ratio descendendi is it's the facts that led directly to what is the opinion actually governing in this case? What was the issue that it was decided? Now, in the process of doing that, you might say, and by the way, I think, I think the moon is made of green cheese, and we ought to investigate that. That's obiter dicta. It's not relevant to the particular decision.
It's outside of the issue.
Right. In the case of Thomas's dissent, to my knowledge, I don't think the attorneys had even brought up the legitimacy of the special counsel.
They hadn't. He just threw it in there. And sometimes courts do. More likely, though, this happens more likely when you get like 4 judges who really want to change the law and think there's a chance of doing it, and they're saying try again. Right.
But in this case, it really is sort of the voice of one crying in the wilderness, probably without a lot of support. So I think Chutkan is going to be right. But again, that's one beauty of studying constitutional law. Is you can't always predict.
Exactly. And this is certainly a year of surprises.
Yes.
So with that, I think we've caught you up on what we think is the hottest legal topics of the week. There are many more out there. So stay tuned with us. We are going to continue this coverage. As much as there is in politics, what we're trying to do is specifically relate it to the legal side of that part. So stay tuned with us if you're looking for this particular Discord. Like, subscribe to our channel, comment on the channel so that you can be reminded when we're coming out each week and so that it can get out to others who want and need that legal piece of it. Don't forget to go to thelawunscripted.com, check out what we have to offer there, including these podcasts, both audio and through YouTube for the video. And again, don't forget to comment. We love those who comment. Please be respectful in your comments. We try to do the same. Thanks for our continued loyal followers. We will be back next week on the Legal Weekly Wine, and we will be continuing. We will be soon publishing on The Law Unscripted the special defenses, including what we've got in this Virginia case, as well as Lorena Bobbitt, the new case of these. Goodness, I can hardly talk. Talk to me, Chelsea. Tell me what it is.
Crystal Kaiser in Wisconsin. We'll talk about the battered women syndrome. We've got a couple other cases that are interesting, sort of self-defense, human trafficking, affirmative defenses.
Yeah, so a little bit outside of politics, but with some of the more interesting cases throughout America that are interesting to more of the public, but as well as law students. We're going to pull what I call the New York subway case, which is one of the decisions I hated the most in law school for self-defense. Crystal Kaiser is going to be one that's very divisive as well, but extremely present and current. So stay tuned with us for all of those. Thank you to everyone, and we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.